Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, the CEO of Boardroom Resources and the co-founder and editor-at-large of Corporate Board Member Magazine. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the show. And it is a special show because we're launching a special European edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. And believe it or not, we're here in lovely Lake Como, Italy, which is the site for Diligence Directors Experience, where we invite European directors to come and share their views on board governance and boardroom trends. We have a guest that is going to be representing our European directors. And let me introduce Sir Peter Bonfield, who's the chairman of the Netherlands-based NXP, the world's fifth largest semiconductor company, and chairman of the software group Global Logic, based in Silicon Valley. He is also a director and chair of audit at the TSMC in Taiwan. Welcome, Sir Peter.
Good morning or good afternoon for wherever you are.
So our topic today, we're going to talk a little bit about cyber, since that sort of bridges both sides of the pond here. And specifically, we're going to talk about board oversight of cyber risk in international companies. So first of all, we can acknowledge that companies all over the world are being hacked. It's not just US companies, and are challenged by not only the attacks, but also how they respond to the attacks. So what do you see as the board's role in overseeing this at international companies? How is it unique, or is it unique?
No, I think it's not unique. Everybody has the issue. The only thing that is slightly different now in Europe is introduction of the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which now has big teeth in Europe, because if you're found to be wanting, you can be fined up to 4 or 5% of your worldwide revenue. So this has now got a significant focus on European companies. We were worried before, rightfully worried before, but now this has got regulatory teeth in it that you've got to be very, very careful on any breaches that then gets into personal data. So in Europe, it's an issue, but now with added teeth.
Well, and we've seen US companies worry about that as well, because if they have this thing.
If you operate in Europe, it's the same thing.
Yep. So how about the role of the board, the oversights? Do you, in European companies, do you see technology committees, or how is that managed?
Most of it is now, the responsibility in the end is board responsibility. GDPR is very specific, it has to be board responsibility, and if you don't have a program driven from the board down, you're letting yourself open to this sort of abuse and fines if you get it wrong. So that's one thing. I think most boards have delegated a lot of it to the audit committee. So all of the things that I'm involved with now, the audit committee, every available opportunity will discuss the impact of what the company is doing to protect the data, to prevent hacking in some way. You're never going to prevent it totally. But what is the reaction of the board, of the company, and then report that back to the board. And I think it's basically to try and make sure that nobody in the company is complacent. If you're not paranoid about this, you're not paying attention. And I think that's the top down from the board has got to put that message into the company.
That's a good segue into my next question, which is, you mentioned that most of the cyber responsibility is in the audit committees. We're seeing that audit committees' agendas are getting awfully full. So in the financial services, they've mandated in the US risk committees, and I'm pretty sure that that's similar at least in the UK. And
in financial services.
Yeah, right. So, but there's somewhat of a trend to look at either risk committees or technology committees to take on the expanse of cyber rather than it be in audit committees. Now we know ultimately anything that's in a committee, it's still the responsibility of the full board, okay? So cyber is, no matter where you put it, it's still the responsibility. But are you seeing anything in European countries where the audit committees are the agendas are too full and they're forming different types of committees to oversee this?
I've not seen it very much at all. I think that the boards don't want to proliferate subcommittees too much. So you have a nominating, you have remuneration, have audit. And I think that to subcontract it to another committee is not that prevalent. I think the key thing is to make sure that the audit committee has enough time, so get the priorities right. But there's the continual feedback to the board. So I'm not saying that the board has sort of delegated it to the audit committee out of sight, out of mind. It's always reported back to the board, because the board in the end has to take that responsibility. And regardless of how much time it's going to take, it has to take the time.
So how would you, in all the experience that you have, what advice would you offer boards that do not have a director that has cyber skills, and consequently nobody on the board is really familiar with the new developments, because it's fairly recent and a lot of them through their business careers never had to deal with cyber? So what advice would you give those boards who really don't have an expert on the board today?
I would bring in outside expert advice. I'd also do benchmarking with other companies in and around the field. A lot of companies are not too concerned about sharing expertise. So to get other companies in to explain how they're doing it is quite a good idea. External expertise is a good idea. And I always tell people it's always useful to have a company outside who's actually trying to attack you. So at least you can get a heads up if you've got some vulnerability. It's not going to stop everything, but at least you've got somebody trying continually to have a go at you.
This is somebody you've hired to.
Yeah, hired that you've had a go at you. Yeah. And actually, because it's such a complex field, I think even having somebody at the board who's competent, they're not going to be competent in all aspects of it. This is so prolific, and it is so technical. But I don't think you can just say, I've got a board member who can do that for me and leave it up to that. I don't think you can do that. It's got to be embedded in the whole company, and I say driven down from the board, that if you're not paranoid, you're not paying attention. Because this is something, when there's so many connected devices, there are so many ways in, this has got to proliferate across the whole company. Whole company. Every individual person in the company is a potential way in, and they've all got to be aware of it.
So we've seen some cases where people have tried to bring on a director that is single focus, that is a CIO or a CTO at a company, but really has no other sort of management experience. Those tests haven't worked very well.
Yeah, I must admit, I don't think that's normally work. The board director should be an inclusive person. You need different views from the board, so you can get not group think, but a sort of more eclectic thinking. But to try and have some expert and say, I won't bother about it because we've got an expert on the board, I don't think that works at all. If you need experts on the board, bring them in for specific board discussions. That's fine. But board members need to be broader across the whole business, the whole company.
Well, Sir Peter, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to join us today. It's been very helpful, and your experience globally is something that a lot of people could learn from.
Well, it's very nice to be here in Como. Yeah. Thank you very much.
And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardroom Special Europe Edition. Next week, we'll find another critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.